Zai is offside for myself, so I am allowing myself to get in touch with it. And having Jonathan here helps with that because it makes me eager to do it. You know, so whenever you're around, I tend to geek out in that way because it's fun. So I'm going to have fun now with the Zai. All right, so with the power of Zai, it is a subjective discernment power. It has a few qualities to it in the psyche. Like Zai, is it's meant to act as a shock absorption system and a suspension system. That's the best way of thinking about it. And that's why we call it the compass bearings. They help you keep your bearings. And that's something we're going to use a lot when we talk about your Zai now. Let's go with the concept of perfection. In the concept of perfection, there are three elements to really understanding perfection as a concept. And that is, and if you have any questions, Jonathan, please feel free to ask at any point.
Sure.
Obviously, there is perfection. You would say, no kidding, perfection is part of perfection, but there's actually two other parts of perfection to make it complete. In order to understand perfection, you must also have imperfection. The concept of perfection implies the concept of imperfection. That's important. Now you need a third element. If perfection implies imperfection, then you must also know which is which, the balance. So that's what we're talking about, which is perfection, imperfection, and balance. A term or a phrase I use a lot when I'm talking about Zai comes from this concept, this overriding concept of Zai, which is the 49-51. And I use that as a metaphor for knowing when to side on one side of something or another. And that is the purview of Zai. And as mentioned with Nai, each of the pod powers is kind of an advocate in the psyche. They advocate for the psyche to do a particular thing. Okay, Zai advocates in the psyche staying in a state of perfection. Now, this state of perfection is never achievable because even if it's achieved for a moment, there will be changes. For example, in the case of a Zai Ni, Ni will give you stuff, and that stuff will stimulate the Zai. You don't have to restabilize. But it has a concept of where that state of equilibrium would be. And where it would be is a perfect balance of perfection with imperfection kept out and knowing which is which. That's the three things. Does that make sense? Okay, so weakness and strength and knowing the difference between the two. And that's one thing that's very sophisticated about Zai in the concept of perfection. Perfection, right brain here, it changes from moment to moment. No thing, no application is ever perfect the same way twice. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay. So, perfection must be constantly like a stew. It must be similar to harmony. It must actually be paid constant attention to. And you see how it turns, and you must play with it to keep it in the sweet spot. And both Zai and Zai have a sweet spot. With Zai, it very much, I think you agree, has a quality of strength and weakness. So perfection is what is strong. Imperfection is what is weak. But here's the key, and this is one thing Zai really likes to know, is kind of the 49-51, Occam's razor, so forth, is which is which in any given moment, for any given situation. That is what it's concerned about. Perfection for right now. Does that make sense for the concept of perfection? And I'll go a little bit more about what it does to the rest of the pod powers. There is a desire to stay on top of that, the measuring of how close we are to perfection and keeping it on perfection. The rest of the psyche is not as concerned with that. Even Z, for example, is concerned more with winning than perfection, which is why Zai is more playful. But it's also more exacting in its own way. It just wants to find perfection because perfection is a goal in and of itself, as is harmony. That's just a goal. Zai and Zai provide very positive equilibrium states, and they advocate for the psyche that these states are to be desired, and the way you act in and interpret things is supposed to be done to keep that state, because in that state you're very strong. Make sense? Okay. So that's, long story short, is Zai is advocating for the psyche. Oh, this is good because Nai, was first when filmed, is a perception power, so it's advocating for information. Does that make sense? It's advocating the psyche pay attention to certain information. Zai, this is our second one, is a discernment power. It's advocating in the psyche for criteria. It wants us to pay attention to criteria that keep us being perfect for a given situation or moment or idea. And Zai is correct that the rest of the psyche will do other things than that if it's not Zai's turn. And all the pod powers, as mentioned with Nai, that's why you have to have priorities, because all the pod powers are fierce advocates for their function. Their department in the psyche, they're like, you should do this, you should do this. Okay, so that's what Zai wants you to do. How does this play out? Okay, the best way to understand is, in your case, Jonathan, it's actually more cerebral. But I'll use a Zai V in this case to kind of get an understanding, is the body. If I am with one of my Zai V friends and they're doing some sort of athletic event, as I oftentimes would do with them, their Zai would pay attention to their hydration, to their flexibility in their joints, the temperature of the room, how warm they were, things like this. Because there's a state, and I'll get in a minute how the cerebrals will have it, there's a state of being where they're in the best state for the activity they're doing. And Zai keeps telling them if they need to drink more, if they need to stretch a little more, maybe they should run around the room a little bit, maybe they should, whatever. It'll keep telling them that. And I believe Zai needs the same thing, but it can do it often for abstractions, where you are following an abstraction. And Zai will keep telling you, because it works like me with my Nai, so I think it'll relate to Zai with Ni. It keeps telling you if you're on the right track. Does it make sense? Kind of like surfing, because Nai and Ni are like more like surfing. But there's a balance to riding that wave. Zai, again, balance, provides that balance. If you don't have it, you fall off. Zai and Zai are very concerned with you not falling off. Not falling off, not getting knocked over, not being discombobulated. That's what it does. So when you get metaphysically drowned, you get thrown, whatever, it is your Zai or your Zai that gets you back into your ready stance. Zai and Zai are very much with the ready stance of the psyche. So, being ready. The first power is clarity. Clarity of mind. And what we're going to talk about now is the constant qualities. What the constant qualities are, these are, Zai is lobbying for perfection, so what it tells the psyche it needs to do, these are the three things. Constantly it says. And that's why Zai provides these constant qualities, because this is really all Zai knows. First is clarity. There's always a moment, and this is one thing that's kind of interesting. Did you ever see like play that game like Hitman?
Yeah.
Okay. Or have you played any games like that where they have sniper rifles?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. What happens is there is like your sniper rifle, when you zoom up really big, so you're really close like this, that's cool because you get a good shot at the target. But the way the games adjust for that is the lens starts wobbling all the fuck over the screen. Okay, well, they had different things like having cool nerves or deep breathing or various other things that allow you to calm yourself down to get yourself back in the zone. And then that slows the lens down and makes it hold where it's supposed to over the target. Zai does that. It can do it with, my case, V, in like visceral ways, sportive ways, or in abstractions. It keeps you the lens right where it's supposed to be, clear. And that's two things. I like clarity. I'm not sure where we use this, Jonathan, but you know there's two words often. There's two. It's clarity and I may come up with a better word, but I think I like this word, framing. Mm-hmm. It's having the lens clear and setting it over the correct thing to look at. And those are two things. So Zai is kind of like, remember double scoping? It basically has its scope set on perfection. Perfection. You're perfection for this scenario. Okay, now, she moves. The subject moves. You have to move your lens. As you do, your lens wobbles. That's important. Is perception powers are movement. The discernment is constantly going to be getting bombarded by things that are going to move the lens. And will also gunk it up. And this can get later to other things like just passion and so forth. Zai is very concerned, as all pod powers are, they have concern because the other powers don't know how to act right. And it's kind of funny, like their basic paranoia, all pod powers are kind of like fierce advocates and paranoid, and that actually goes all the way out from the powers, that close, and then out to the people. But like my Nai feels kind of like it does towards the world, towards the other powers. And Zai is the same way. So Zai basically feels that you have to keep paying attention to this to keep it on there. Does that make sense? You have to stay on that rudder. If you take your hand off that rudder, how would you know what it's doing? That's key with Zai and with Zai. If you take your hand off the rudder, in this case a tower, when you try to touch a tower, it's like a rudder. As soon as you take your hand off of it, you could be losing stability, you could have your shocks out, your lens could be gunked up, and you don't know. You only know when you touch it again. And so Zai advocates that you wipe the lens and check its framing pretty much constantly. If it had its way, which in the case of Zai Alpha it does. When you're following abstractions, this is why your kind keeps such a logical focus, and it's actually very hard to confuse you when you're following something. Zai does not like confusion. And a clear lens, and it's staying where it's supposed to. And this is key. What moves it around is other forces in the psyche. And Zai tells them to stop doing that. In particular, Ji, but it actually tells all the other ones to stop doing that. Its dispassion actually extends to the rest of the pod powers and to the rest of Mojo's spirit forms. Oh, which is why I mentioned with Nai and with Zai, there is such a high propensity of both of them on dissociation. They share that propensity. Because if I had to use this equation, Zai says, don't shake me. Zai is paying attention to keeping that clear eye so perfection is not lost. But if you stop doing it, the moment you step away, you're losing it. And that's again where we use this analogy, the 49-51. Zai will note the minutest amount of loss of clarity. Where the rest of psyche is very slow to notice that, Zai will notice that immediately. And so it notices it, it starts yanking the doorbell, so to speak, of the psyche. Like, okay, this need to pay attention to, we have lost clarity. That's very important. The reason why the clarity is so important, it kind of flow this way, is because of the need for precision. If you are interpreting data, what is important? If you don't see what you're looking at clearly, if you don't feel an environment, if it's V, for example, clearly, then you lack understanding, and all of your applications will be off. This gets later on, like calibration and so forth. Is Zai has to do with how you are customized. You know your configuration, everybody's configuration? Zai is like your customized feature. And so it's really kind of cool that way. And what it's always trying to customize for is, given your configuration and its state, how would we be closest to perfection for this moment, this problem, this abstraction, whatever. Precision. Zai is very concerned that people or systems, oftentimes Zai relates to Z this way, are not seeing clearly. Often because it's not framed on the right thing. Zai will feel the vibrations, that's what I was looking for. Zai will feel the vibrations of poor performance. Do you have a gut reaction with Zai in certain things when evil's around? Okay, well, when poor performance starts happening in a system, both its own system or any system it's paying attention to, this is key for how Zai can really help, it will notice any flaw in a system immediately. If it plays on it, as it plays, it will find where, I know most people use the system like this, but actually it's faster like this. Zai always knows that. That's what's really cool about Zai is it also works because right brain power at fast speeds. As fast as thought is going or fast as any kind of sportive thing you can think of is going. So, do you know how, go back to clarity, I'm jumping around a little bit, do you know how when things go very fast, they start to get blurry? Zai helps you with that. When ideas go very fast or when activities go very fast, the blur factor is reduced by your Zai. So that's another thing that aids a great deal in the clarity aspect. And precision. Again, I can use this sighting a gun analogy, but again, if things are moving very fast or there's a lot of them moving at once, that tends to look blurry. Almost anything you can think metaphorically that starts to get blurry, Zai keeps it unblurry. I can't explain. In a storm, in rapid movement, in lots of weaves that look similar, Zai is able to spot how they are different, even at a great confusion, even at a great rate of speed, even a very large volume. As a subjective discernment power, it often acts as a suspension system, which is sort of like trying to keep you from moving. And one of the things it'll say is precision. It will often voice, we do not have a precise enough understanding, so we should not move. And that's when things, Zai and Zai often act as a braking mechanism in the psyche for appropriate reasons, to be able to steer. Similar to how these steer in like a forward way. This is like I can't keep saying, but like a suspension system or an automatic defense system. It's kind of these things that operate in auto so you don't get thrown off. You keep doing what you were doing. But sometimes you do need to stop what you're doing, in which case you'll feel your suspension kick in. Precision. If the system is being too imprecise, Zai will start actually vibrating and you'll feel it, whatever level Zai is in your system. Next, dispassion. This particularly relates to the influences of emotion, which is one of the things that rattles a system. And in this case, I relate over here with Nai, how Nai is different from V, as we all know, but in its own way, the most opposite thing of Nai is Vi. Because it does what you were built to do, but it does something else, not what you do. So for you, Zai is actually, it's very similar, but also it's very, very different. And here's where it is. Appeals to Zai would vibrate you. Being pushed on with Ji would vibrate and take you off perfection. Does that make sense? You actually might vibrate Zai and you might get something closer to harmony, but you will step away from perfection. Those are two different goals. Does that make sense? That discernment power. So Zai says, get that off of me. It acts as a suspension system and also like a defensive shield. When things come in, they're going to push the system around and it doesn't want to be pushed around. So dispassion is almost like a shield of no. You know what I mean? That doesn't get on me. That doesn't affect me. And one of the main ones is appeals done by Zai or by Ji. That pipeline. Okay. So what we talked about there is the constant qualities, and that's what Z, because it wants perfection, wants to keep perfection constantly, it keeps saying, hello, we should be doing clarity, precision, dispassion. Always we should be doing this. It's kind of a broken record with that. Everyone's constant qualities or innate state, you're a broken record like that. That's why they're good at their job. All right, now, you're raising your hand. Zai is raising his hand. What happens if you answer it? What will it do? Okay, it will want to use its powers of detection. If it's saying, we need clarity, precision, dispassion, and I haven't checked in a while, and you're saying, okay, go check on that. Go check on the clarity and precision, the dispassion, go check on it. How's he going to go check? We're going to go back to the thing we said before of weakness, strength, and knowing the difference. Balance. Strength, weakness, balance. So the first thing that Zai is going to assume is that in its absence from the last time it touched, and this can be a moment, a second, if Zai comes off it for a second, just like Jai, when it gets back on, it immediately wants to check and see how far away from perfection did shit stray from the last time I was there. Diagnostics. And as I mentioned with all the pod powers, Zai starts with itself. How does it feel in its innate state? And it comes to a state of perfection because it has that power. It's the only power that has that. It actually knows what the concept of perfection is. So it'll attempt to do that. As it does, it'll feel some resistance. And it'll want to know why. That vibration of why it cannot reach perfection will tell it where the problem is. Zai is just really good. It's called diagnostic. And it can do anything that is pulling on Zai can be diagnostic. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. I'm not saying a word, I'm making that up. But Zai will first diagnostic itself by trying to achieve the state of perfection that it came built with. It can always do that. The only question is, what's stopping it? What's resisting it, that happening? It can be done where it connects to the objective perception, and it checks what perceptions are being perceived incorrectly. Zai's very good at doing that. If you ask Zai, it'll immediately go, oh, hey, it will kind of like clear your lens. Whatever perception lens is, it'll clear it and you'll start seeing it more clearly and the diagnostic will have been achieved. It can also work on the perception powers over here. Zai can correct memory. They tell me, I don't even have this, but if you have Vi and Zai, what you do, when you go into your Vi, as you're going around, you're going, is that how that happened? You try to remember if it happened like one way or the other. Your Zai will say, it happened like that. It'll help your memory stay clear. Because lots of people remember things, but then they remember lots of stuff, but what they remember, some of it isn't as precise. Zai keeps what you do remember being fairly precise in the memory. If it's important to keeping that perfection. That's mainly what Zai concerns itself about. That's what it does with my Nai. It pays attention to things that are important for the state of perfection. And actually, when you go double scope, you really can't be in here without this because you'll be totally lost. That's important. That's why you have to have both. They're together when we're working other ways. And then, of course, you have Zai with out here. G and Z more pleasantly for Zai, but both G and Z will push on Zai. They are the impactors. This is stimulus from the environment, but also you get Z and G given to you by books you read, by things like this. So constantly your system is being bombarded with you should move. That's basically G and Z are going to tell you is you should move here, you should do things like this. But that might take us away from what? Perfection. And Zai has the veto card, and that veto card gets higher depending on how high in the psyche it goes. In your case, it's the highest one, which is the veto of no, that has no hold on me. Next. Does that make sense for diagnostics?
Yeah.
Let me be more sophisticated here. You can imagine Zai being vibrated like this, right? But I can vibrate Zai by doing this. My V feels this. And as it does, my Zai tells me how that's feeling. It's a discernment power. In the case of Zai Ni, you can listen to music, whatever, and you're being carried away with the Ni, but the Zai kind of tells you how this is going, if it's going well. It still discerns as you're being bounced along. For this reason, Zai can actually work at very long range. And diagnostic, especially with Ni, anything that the psyche can find a way of connecting to the Zai. So for example, if you're playing an MMORPG and your psyche has gotten into that, your Zai will naturally start correcting the work of the game. You'll start thinking of better ways it can be played, new characters that can come into it. Zai will just naturally do that because your Zai has now been attached to it some way. Maybe your Ni likes the game. So as the game gets vibrated, as the game has better performance, maybe some scenes in the game are more boring than others, that makes your Zai go, because it was attached. And that's a diagnostic. It'll say, it's like gameplay, oh, that wasn't fun. Zai is very good at telling when something was slow, when it didn't go well, when the flow wasn't still there. Like you had it and then, no, now you don't have it anymore. So that's the power of diagnostic. It's like a flow, a perfection, and it's fun. Flowing, oh, this is perfect, oh, that's perfect, oh, like Sheldon, that wasn't perfect. And so that's what it does. And would you agree, when Zai is riding perfection, it's the sweetest thing ever. And when it's not, well, that's just shite. And it's very, kind of like good and evil with Zai. Perfection is awesome, and imperfection is shit. I mean, it's very black and white, and fast. I can't keep mentioning this enough. Zai is right brain, and therefore, as opposed to Z, there's a constant updating quality to it, but not an articulation. The diagnostics has a feel to it. There's a feeling around. You know what I'm talking about? Where Zai is kind of like playing with it, and it just sort of feels this is stronger. This is where it's different. It doesn't speak. It doesn't have a 1, 2, 3, a sequence. In fact, often Zai will do something, and then I'll have to go, what did I just do? That's almost always how it works. I'll do it, and then I'll figure out how did I do that. Because it was moving so fast, and you found perfection while moving. And you look back and go, what was perfection? It's really cool that way. But that makes it hard to articulate, like Zai. So that's being aware of this. Right brain powers are hard to articulate. I'll mention this on all the right brain powers I film, why they're hard to articulate. That's why Zai is hard to articulate, because it doesn't really know itself until it's being vibrated. And when it's being vibrated, that takes over its entire consciousness until the vibrating stops, and then Zai just stops moving. So, the suspension system. Next. Oh, I love this one. When it's being vibrated, we often think of it sort of like a tower defense, suspension, keeping you stable during shock, but there's something else, and that is the ability to, I guess like a divining rod, like a metal detector. Zai and Zai both have this kind of power. In this case, it's for strength. Not only when Zai attempts to come to that state of perfection, it will feel what's stopping it. Why can't I get there? It also do it during flow. Why is it not working? And that's a diagnostic of feeling perfections, but it'll also feel, ooh, that's good, that's strong. It's like an addiction. Zai is addicted to strength, and it will hunt it, and it uses principal understanding to know when it has hit strength. Anytime it does, it adds that to its abilities to detect. And pretty much any perception we're seeing, we'll then know that strength when we see it. Like any principle in action, once we've noted it, we can pretty much note it in any of its manifestations. And this works very well, particularly again, when you can't articulate things. Sometimes I'll use cooking, because that's often where my Zai in this way comes up, is I know something's working in the sauce, but what's working is a quality that somehow involves a little bit of curry, a little bit of oregano, a little of this, a little of that. I don't know what it is, but it's a quality that's strong in this dish. And if I could give this dish more of this quality, it'll be stronger. Now, I can't explain what that is, but I can do it. I can add it and taste it, and add it and taste it, and add it and taste it, and I will know Principle understanding. I'm trying to make this like this other dish I did, but like from this country. That's some sort of principle understanding I'm going for, and as I'm doing it, I'm taking a principle from one cuisine and a principle from another cuisine, and I'm doing it in some new cuisine that I've never done before. But while I'm doing it, I'm like, yeah, that's like those two dishes. That's made up. Which is why also Zai has a very creative quality to it, because often it's trying to find a spot that is unique to itself, as Zai does. Principle understanding, what it is in short, is anything that's working. Anything that's working in any given moment or any given situation. I'm sure you use this a lot when you're doing the composing. Use certain riffs on one track, but not another. Why? It's not working there. And Zai knows that. It's one of those things, it's just an internal knowing, a feel. In this case, not an emotional feel, a feel in a vibratory sense. It can detect that. That's a better way of saying it. It simply can detect that vibration. For example, if you see, I was going to use with the V, because I'm familiar with this, for example, Zai V, is visual art. A lot of people will look at different artwork and it will hit them. But they don't know necessarily why. For example, like that Pyramid of Power in Frazetta. That's a principle understanding. Apparently that does that. What you just said over there was a principle. That's a principle. Zai is very good at looking at something, and without anyone telling them what principles are in effect, it'll know. It gets hit by the principles. The principles that are happening will hit the Zai, and it'll go, ooh, and it'll want to play with it, use it for its own. That's it there. So now we've taken away the weaknesses with diagnostics. We're not taking away, we found them. And now we found the strengths with principle understanding. Now we have to go with the balancing. And again, this comes in constantly. Weakness, strength, balance. Because, again, a riff in one song could be strong, but the same riff in another song is actually weak. So that's my perfection, is it doesn't stay the same. It keeps changing from one day to another. Like one day, it's a curry day. Other day is not a curry day. Why? Just because. And this is something that people have to get used to. All the subjective powers. Of the subjective powers, Vi has the easiest time with it because it's memories and people know what it is and you can talk about it. But the other three subjective powers have a hard time actually saying what they do, and people feeling confident. Like, people feel confident about their memories, and if they don't feel confident in memories, like in my case, or a lot of interpretatives, they feel bad about themselves. But if you can't do nigh guessing, if you can't do vibratory detection of Zai, most people don't think that shit even exists. It's not. It's gold. It's awesome. So it's very important for those who have Zai to know that that's a real power, and it really works, and that's how it works. You have Zai, I'm sure you know this already, but it does. You can vibrate and you know things. Number 6 on the detection is situational logic and analysis. And I'm basically hinting at it already, so I'll go there again with like the music. Is when you diagnostic or find the weakness in a piece of music you're working on, and then you find the principles at work in it or other pieces that you are sort of influenced by for this piece that are giving it strength, and you increase them. But those could be similar components in another track you're working on. Similar, but not the same. And Zai is really good at telling the difference when something is off. There has to be an acceptance, and this is where it's different than, say, left brain logic, of every moment has a truth of its own. Does that make sense? Every song beat, every few keys or beats of a song had its own truth. And so when you were there, it made sense to make a shift. The suspension system says that is the right thing to do there. And in this case, I'll use this as a compliment. Those are judgment calls. In the moment judgment calls on trying to achieve perfection on each and every beat. This can be expanded over a longer period of time, particularly, for example, using knee because it's more abstract, in that you could do situational analysis on a large model, on a project that takes months and weeks. You could actually keep using your Zai on something like that and seeing how, for example, I'll use a relation to Z. Z is very good at organizing all the provisions and weapons and various things on a ship. But you could actually configure all that in a different way, depending on whether or not it would increase performance. As the provisions are being used up, does this make sense? The totality of it is shifting, and at some point, you might want to do a rearrangement. Zai's really good at knowing when that would be. Does that make sense? Like, you know what? Actually, we've lost this much provisions in this chamber and this chamber. We could actually combine them and go over here. And it just knows that. Like all of a sudden, because that didn't really present itself till earlier. At some point, it presents itself, and everyone will notice it. But the higher Zai is in your priority, the quicker it notices. Kind of like the quicker Zai notices that we've stepped away from perfection. It notices that right away. So Zai notices when, the key to situational analysis and logic is knowing when the situation has changed. And that's the crucial thing as far as the balance there is for situational logic analysis as the situation has changed, Houston. And Zai's very good at vibrating, ding, hey, hello, situation changed, new rules. It is like, and Z's are like games. Different game, different rules. Zai knows when the game has changed. New game, new rules. Processing, this is the next. So we had, Zai has the concept of perfection. That's what it wants for the psyche. It feels that is the most important thing for the psyche to do, to have. And it keeps raising its hand for the psyche to pay attention to clarity, precision, and dispassion. If the psyche pays attention to that, it will start doing what it does, and that is detecting. It will do that with the diagnostics, principle understanding, situational logic. When it detects these things, it will then again lobby that we should do something about it. Mm-hmm. And what is that? That is the processing. Number 7, refining. That is the actual taking out of the weakness. Now it sounds simple, but it's not. Because it's a constant judgment call. Again, we're going back to this precision element. When you go in to take out weakness, you're not supposed to take out any strengths. And that sounds simple, but actually those who don't have Zai have a really hard time with it, which is why Zai users get annoyed at people. Because they go in to fix or make something better and they make it worse. So it really is a power to know how to refine something to take out weakness but not disturb anything that doesn't need to be disturbed. Zai's like very, very precise on that. It just knows how to do that. So just how it can be vibrated, and it's very sensitive to that, as it's doing something, it's the processing, Zai has an extremely steady hand. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And that's part of refining, is you actually have to be able to get just at it. Nothing more, nothing less. And this is actually continuing on the next one, which is optimizing. In a similar kind of way, well, I guess it's a little different. Kind of like having a steady hand, that's like refinement. You go in, take out what you're supposed to, almost like surgery. You're kind of like cutting out the cancer. Ideas, movements, everything has weakness in it. And Zai can go in there like a weakness surgeon, just cut it out, but not disturb anything else, because you don't want to do anything to disturb the good, right, the good part of the patient. Next is I guess how you would actually, one, recover from being imperfect. What's the best route to optimize? So it helps that, because Zai has a great gradient ability, a way of actually knowing from moment to moment what you should do next for strength. Like with athletes, Zai will actually tell you, like, I should drink some water now. I should do this, I should do that. So it actually keeps you kind of up to speed. It also helps you know how to put strength into something in the most non-intrusive way. Zai is very good about that. It's why in this way it's more similar to Zai than with Z. Because although you're very logical, there's a desire to not mess with something that's working.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense? Zai and Zai, not like a literal stay with what you know, you don't knock over bridges that are working. You actually go in and you take out what's not working and put in what's working. There's great nuance with Zai in this way. It's hard sometimes to articulate Zai, and so in this way it can seem clumsy. But Z can see clumsy in reverse. When it comes to applying something, there's a steady hand and there's a gradient ability, both with action and with ideas, of taking them forward and noting moment to moment if this is still working. Because as you optimize, and there's like, well, I can optimize. Can you? I think Zai users would debate this. Can you optimize without disturbing perfection? That's what I'm trying to get to with the patient. In this case, the patient is for you, your baby, the concept of perfection.
Yeah.
Can you refine and not lessen perfection in some other way? Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. And can you optimize without lessening perfection in some other way?
Right.
Because there's always a potential, and Zai's very keen on this, as is Zai in its way, toxicity. Toxicity entering at any step. And so basically at perfection, Zai is going to allow for a variety of functions for the psyche to be done while not leaving perfection. And if you do leave perfection, noting it as soon as possible and getting back to perfection as quickly as possible. That's what Zai is concerned about. Number 9, calibrating. This again goes with getting rid of weaknesses without doing any other harm, putting in strengths without messing anything else up, and knowing which to do and when and for how long. That's the customizing effect. You notice that customizing keeps coming in here as a repeat thing. The 49-51, knowing when that's the right time to play it and for how long. Calibrating, for lack of a better term, something we talked about, is like crunching to get to perfection. It's like a muscle. That's probably why it's the 9th one. We've gone all the way from the cons of perfection, and as we get down now, as all the powers do, more to like real world application, applying it out, it's like a muscle, and that's the pump, is calibration. I think it goes from the concept of perfection, and everything is, as far as what it does in the processing, is to calibrate, to calibrate, to calibrate, to calibrate. And it basically does this 24/7. This actually gets to the next part of the theme of deductive reasoning and reactive theorizing. We'll start with calibrating. Is Zai just keeps doing it. It keeps feeling the vibration, and it's like it's honing a tool, and it can never be honed enough. Because the psyche is going to take these tools and use them. And when they come back to the tool shed, they need to be cleaned up of imperfection again. And you're like, what if I don't use that much? It wouldn't matter. For Zai, we could be sharpening an idea, or a tool, or anything else, a movement. I could be sharpening a technique, a physical technique. It's never perfect enough. If you have Zai, you should understand it's never perfect enough. There's the concept, and then all of this comes into detecting, and you try and make it more perfect, and you try to make it more perfect. And the calibrating is the muscle. It is the muscle of applying the concept of perfection to a target, something that's actually happening, an idea. So perfection is basically kind of like Plato's forms. The form of perfection is put on top, and like a muscle, perfection is massaging. Calibration is basically the concept of perfection massaging something. And this massaging, because this is logic based, it's intense. It's a very strict, and it's cold. Again, 49:51. Sometimes I use a Zai. Zai often tells people that they're feeling bad or so forth, or good, and these considerations can make the data not as precise as it should be. Zai will not let you do that. And it sounds cold, but Zai, I think you agree, would not feel that. It's cold, but it's not unfeeling or uncaring. Zai is concerned with giving absolutely correct data. I mean, it must be correct or its worth is lost. Zai tells the psyche things of when it has started to work, that's very nice, and when it stopped working. For example, when you are doing an idea for music, when you go off, you tried an idea with your knee and you're bouncing somewhere, but it's gone off. How long does it take until you realize it's off? Zai knows that. Does that make sense? You can continue to know if it's off better and better until it's not off at all. That's what calibration is. Calibration is an attempt to actually make it as perfect as it can be to the perfect form. That's only possible if all these other steps have been done on it. When you play a song through and it's working, there comes a point where there's nothing wrong with it, but it has not found its perfect form yet. And don't you just listen to it again and again, play with it, and then it just finds its perfect form. Zai has an ability. With a physical activity, with an idea, anything like that, it can just keep playing with it and it will know when it has actually achieved perfection. And that sounds simple, but again, it's not. Because people, and I think you know what I'm talking about here, especially with music composition, there's a point past perfect. You actually make a song, I'm sure there's like artwork. I know it's for visual arts, so I assume it's the same with music art. You actually had the perfect composition, and then you kept doing shit to it. Calibration is knowing when you have actually gotten it. Mm-hmm. So you start with a concept perfection, and then anything that you're dealing with, you do all the detection work and the processing work to eventually calibrate it to perfection, and then stop on a dime. It's exact. It's absolutely correct. It stops on a dime. Now, if things move, you're vibrating or something, it'll then do all whatever, and then again stop on a dime. And that's what keeps up, like a suspension system. But it's the best one ever for your psyche. Now, this all comes under the theme of reactive theorizing and deductive reasoning. Deductive reasoning is basically asking how something flows. Now, when things flow very fast, very complicated, lots of things going on around it, people tend to get lost. Zai does not. And so, I think a really good way of thinking about this is sort of like falling into water where you get turned upside down. When people look at information, the information can turn you upside down. Your knee can turn you upside down. My V, for example, if I'm in a grappling match and I get thrown, I go into a state of lost equilibrium, not knowing where I am. You have to follow the air bubbles, right? Where are the air bubbles? And that tells you where up is. Zai can do that for anything. Anything you're doing, if you get in trouble, Zai will tell you where the right path is, where the air bubbles is, where you're supposed to go. That's pretty much its sole function, is to keep taking you towards where your strength was. Particularly if you've lost it, or someone's trying to knock you off your strength. Zai will not let that happen. It will not let you lose touch with what's working. It also won't let you forget if it's not working. Zai is ruthless. It's logic-based. It will tell you absolutely what is working and not working with anything an enemy is doing, a friend is doing, you're doing. It's totally cold that way, but that's the favor it does. The favor is it is absolutely clear, precise, logical information, or in this case, criteria for interpreting information. Because there's a tendency to interpret information incorrectly. Zai keeps that from happening. It keeps the psyche from interpreting information incorrectly because some other reason. And there's always some other reason that the psyche wants to do it. Even Nai will say, we want to attach. Ji will say this. Z will say, they'll say why we should move and stay in this confused state. Because of all the powers, Zai has the least stomach for confusion. All the other powers have more of a stomach for it. Zai has no stomach for it. And deductive reasoning, is actually removing confusion. Confusion of the mind, confusion of the situation. Reactive theorizing. This is the ability to, it's not an ability, it's actually a need, as all the powers are on their way, of once perfection has been violated, it must be put to right. Does that make sense? It must be put back. So for example, scientists who use Zai, once there's something out there that, let's say the laws of physics, E equals mc squared, or some other thing out there, like, it makes sense for most stuff, but some stuff it doesn't. Ooh, that's annoying. And Zai gets very annoyed with that. It always finds like, but that's not working. And even though they say, yes, but that's a small part. Yes, but it should be what? Perfect. It's not perfect. And it will not stop. It is absolutely relentless and ruthless at finding perfection and not letting things pass or stand that are not perfection, because everything should be.